Chapter 1. 8 years. That was how long I had spent by Adrian Zhou's side. I adjusted the stack of documents in my hands, heels clicking softly against the marble floor as I walked toward the CEO's office. The familiar rhythm of the company surrounded me, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, hurried footsteps echoing through the halls. It was a world I had helped build, brick by brick, sleepless night by sleepless night. And at the center of it all was him. Miss Chen, the 10 a.m. meeting documents. One of the junior staff asked nervously as I passed. In your inbox, I replied calmly without stopping. Check page 12 for the revised financial projections. They blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting such a precise answer. But that was normal. After all, I wasn't just a secretary, I was his secretary. I reached the office doors and knocked once. Come in. His voice was the same as always, low, composed, completely devoid of unnecessary emotion. I stepped inside, placing the documents neatly on his desk. Adrian Zhou sat behind it, dressed impeccably in a tailored black suit, his sharp features illuminated by the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His eyes flicked up briefly to acknowledge me before returning to his laptop. Your 10 a.m. meeting materials, I said. I've also rescheduled your afternoon appointment to accommodate the overseas call. That was all, a simple acknowledgement. 8 years, and nothing had changed. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. Stay. I paused, fingers tightening slightly around the tablet in my hand before turning back. Yes, President Zhou. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit, go over the figures. I sat down, pulling up the data immediately. My voice remained steady as I walked him through every detail: profit margins, expansion forecasts, risk analysis. He listened in silence, occasionally interjecting with sharp, precise questions that demanded equally precise answers. This was how we worked, perfectly synchronized, efficient, professional. Unbreakable. As I spoke, I couldn't help but remember how different things had been 8 years ago. Back then, this company had been nothing more than a small startup operating out of a cramped office space. Adrian had been younger, but no less intimidating, driven, ruthless, and completely consumed by his work. I had just graduated, clutching my resume with nervous hands, applying for a job just to be near him again. Because once upon a time, I had liked him. No, that wasn't quite right. I had admired him. He had been a senior in my college, well-known, untouchable, always surrounded by people. I had been just another face in the crowd, watching from afar. When I heard he had started his own company, I applied without hesitation. I told myself it was for experience, for growth. But the truth was simpler. I wanted to see him again. How naive I had been. Miss Chen. His voice pulled me back to the present. I realized I had paused for a fraction of a second. My apologies, I said smoothly, continuing without missing a beat. Adrian's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than usual, as if he had noticed something. But then he said nothing, returning his attention to the documents. That was how it always was. He never asked unnecessary questions, never crossed boundaries, never allowed emotions to interfere with work. And over time, neither did I. The admiration I once had slowly faded, worn down by endless deadlines, sleepless nights, and his relentless expectations. What remained was something steadier, colder. Loyalty, habit, routine. I stood once the discussion ended. If there's nothing else, I'll prepare for your next meeting. He gave a slight nod. I turned and walked out, closing the door quietly behind me. The moment I stepped back into the hallway, I exhaled softly, my shoulders relaxing just a fraction. 8 years. 8 years of standing beside him, supporting him, understanding him better than anyone else in this company. And yet, to Adrian Zhou, I was still just his secretary. Nothing more. Chapter 2. Before I became Adrian Zhou's secretary, I was just another student trying not to stare at him too much. Back then, the campus felt bigger, brighter, filled with possibility. I was a freshman, still adjusting to lectures, assignments, and the overwhelming freedom of university life. And then there was him, Adrian Zhou, a senior everyone seemed to know. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. While others laughed in groups or showed off, Adrian stood apart, calm, composed, and untouchable. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his sharp features always set in that same unreadable expression. Professors praised him. Students respected him. Some feared him. And me. I noticed him. It started small, passing glimpses in the hallway, seeing his name at the top of academic rankings, hearing whispers about how he had already secured investors for a future business before even graduating. He felt distant, like someone from a different world. Yet somehow, I found myself watching him anyway. I remember one particular afternoon clearly. I had stayed late in the library, struggling with a project I couldn't quite figure out. The campus had quieted down, the usual chatter replaced by the soft rustle of pages and the hum of fluorescent lights. That was when he walked in. Adrian moved with purpose, heading straight for the reference section. He didn't notice me, or maybe he did and simply didn't care. I watched as he pulled out a book, flipping through it with focused precision. For a moment, I hesitated. Then, before I could stop myself, I stood up and walked over. Excuse me," I said softly. He looked up. Just like that, my heart skipped. His gaze was sharp, assessing, as if measuring my worth in a single glance. It wasn't unkind, but it wasn't warm either. "Yes." I swallowed, suddenly aware of how nervous I sounded. I was wondering if you could help me with something. This concept, I don't quite understand it." For a second, I thought he would refuse. But instead, he glanced at my notes, then back at me. "Show me." That was all. No hesitation, no unnecessary words. I handed him my notebook, and he scanned it quickly before explaining the problem in a way that made everything click instantly. His voice was calm, precise, and efficient, like he was solving a simple equation rather than helping a struggling junior. "Does that make sense?" he asked. I nodded quickly. "Yes, thank you." He gave a slight nod, already turning back to his book as if the interaction had never happened. And yet, it stayed with me. From that day on, I found small excuses to approach him. Questions about assignments, clarifications about lectures. He never lingered, never engaged beyond what was necessary, but he never refused either. Slowly, that distant admiration grew into something softer, a quiet crush I kept to myself. But it didn't last. Because the closer I got, the more I realized something important. Adrian Zhou wasn't cold because he disliked people. He was cold because nothing mattered to him except his goals. Not friendships, not relationships, not emotions. Just success. I saw it in the way he worked through the night without rest, the way he dismissed invitations from classmates, the way he spoke about the future, not with excitement, but with certainty, as if everything else was irrelevant. And eventually, I understood. There was no place for someone like me in his world. Still, when I heard he had started his own company after graduation, I applied anyway. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was lingering attachment. Or maybe I just wanted to see if anything had changed. Looking back now, standing in the present after 8 long years, I almost laughed at my younger self. Because Adrian Zhou had never changed. And somewhere along the way, neither had I. Chapter 3. There are lines in every workplace. Clear ones, unspoken ones. Lines you don't cross if you want to keep things simple, professional, safe. Adrian Zhou and I crossed them a long time ago. And we never talked about it. The first time it happened, it was late. Of course it was. Back then, the company was still growing, and working hours didn't really exist. We stayed until midnight most days, sometimes longer, chasing deadlines that never seemed to end. That night had been particularly exhausting. An investor meeting had gone wrong, tensions were high, and even Adrian's usual composure had cracks in it. I had been in his office, reviewing documents when I noticed it. The silence, not the usual focused quiet, but something heavier. "President Zhou," I said carefully, "the revised proposal is ready." "Lina." It was the first time he had interrupted me like that. The first time he had used my name without formality. I looked up. Something in his gaze had changed. Still controlled, still sharp, but darker, heavier, like the weight of everything he carried had finally surfaced. "Stay," he said. I should have left. I knew that even then. But I didn't. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the quiet, lingering part of me that had never completely let go of the girl who once admired him. He stood up slowly, walking toward me. Each step was measured, deliberate, leaving no room for misunderstanding. My breath caught, but I didn't move. "Do you understand what you're doing?" he asked quietly. I didn't. Or maybe I did, and chose not to acknowledge it. Because the next moment he was close, too close. And I didn't step away. What happened after that was inevitable. There were no confessions, no tenderness, no promises, just tension, years of it finally snapping. Afterward, as I sat there trying to steady my breathing, I waited for something. Regret, awkwardness, an apology. But Adrian simply adjusted his cufflinks, his expression already returning to its usual calm. "This won't affect work," he said, as if stating a business agreement. I blinked, my emotions still tangled, unsteady. "Of course. And it won't happen unless both parties agree," he added. "A condition, a boundary, a contract." I nodded, understood. And just like that, it was decided. From then on, it happened occasionally. Rarely, always controlled, always deliberate. Never spoken of outside those moments. During the day, we were exactly the same, CEO and secretary, efficient and distant. Meetings, schedules, deadlines, not a single glance out of place. At night, we crossed the line again. And every time, it ended the same way. No lingering, no emotions, no discussion. Just silence. At first, I thought it might mean something. That maybe, beneath his cold exterior, there was something more, something human, something that connected us beyond work. But over time, I realized the truth. To Adrian, it was nothing more than release. A way to manage stress. Efficient, controlled, necessary. Just like everything else in his life. And slowly, I adapted. The small, lingering feelings I once had faded completely, replaced by something steadier. Detached, logical. If it meant nothing to him, then it would mean nothing to me. That was the rule I set for myself. And I followed it. For years. Until recently. Because lately, something had changed. The way he looked at me lingered a second too long. The way he called me into his office more often than necessary. The way his voice softened, just slightly, when we were alone. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable to anyone else. But I had spent 8 years by his side. I noticed everything. And for the first time since we crossed that line, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Unease. Because the rules we had followed for so long, clear, controlled, emotionless, were starting to blur. Chapter 4. At first, I thought I was imagining it. After 8 years of working with Adrian Zhou, I knew his patterns better than anyone. His routines were precise, his expectations consistent, his behavior predictable. Which was exactly why the change stood out so clearly. "Lina." I paused mid-step outside his office, fingers tightening slightly around the tablet in my hand. I had just finished briefing him less than 10 minutes ago. "Yes, President Zhou." "Come in." I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. He was seated at his desk, posture straight, expression unreadable as always. Nothing seemed out of place, except the fact that he had called me back in for no apparent reason. "Yes," I asked again. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze lingered on me, steady and intent, as if he were observing something I couldn't see. "Sit," he said finally. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking the seat across from him. "Is there something you need?" Silence. Then, "Have you eaten?" I blinked. "Excuse me." His expression didn't change. "Lunch, did you have it?" For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Adrian Zhou had never asked me a personal question in 8 years. Not about my health, not about my life, not about anything unrelated to work. "I will eat later," I said carefully. A faint crease appeared between his brows. "That wasn't my question." "I've been busy," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Another pause. Then he stood up. My breath hitched slightly as he walked around the desk, stopping just beside me. The proximity felt familiar, dangerously so, but this was different. There was no tension like before, no unspoken agreement, just something quieter, heavier. "You're overworking again," he said. Again. The word lingered in my mind. "I'm doing my job," I answered calmly, though something in my chest felt unsettled. His gaze dropped briefly to the tablet in my hands, then back to my face. "You didn't used to look this tired." My fingers tightened. This wasn't like him. Adrian didn't notice things like this. He didn't comment on appearances, didn't concern himself with anything outside of performance and results. And yet here he was. "I'll be fine," I said, standing up slightly to create distance. "If there's nothing work-related." "Stay." The word was softer this time. Not a command, not quite a request either. I froze. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the air, in the way his voice had shifted, in the way he was looking at me, not as his secretary, not as a subordinate, but as something else. Something undefined. "President Zhou," I said carefully. "If there are no further instructions, I should return to work." For a moment, he said nothing. His eyes searched mine, as if weighing something, calculating something. Then, slowly, he stepped back. "Go," he said. Relief flooded through me, though I didn't let it show. I gave a small nod and walked out, closing the door behind me. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, my heart was racing. That wasn't normal. None of it was. And it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, it kept happening. He called me into his office more often than necessary, sometimes for minor clarifications that could have been handled over email. Meetings ran longer than they needed to. Conversations lingered. And then there were the nights. "Stay a little longer," he said once, as I gathered my things to leave. It wasn't unusual for me to work late, but that night, for the first time, there was no clear reason for it. No urgent deadline, no pressing issue. Just him. "I've completed everything for today," I replied. He didn't argue, but his gaze followed me as I left. It was subtle, anyone else might have missed it. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because after 8 years of knowing him, understanding him, adapting to him, I knew one thing for certain. Adrian Zhou did nothing without reason. Which meant this change, this sudden attention, this unfamiliar closeness, was intentional. And for the first time in years, I didn't know what he wanted. Chapter 5. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Ordinary, routine, predictable, just like every other day I had spent in this company for the past 8 years. I was reviewing the morning reports at my desk when the office suddenly grew louder than usual. Whispers, gasps, the faint buzz of excitement spreading like wildfire. I frowned slightly, glancing up. The employees around me were huddled together, phones in hand, their expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. "What's going on?" I asked one of the assistants passing by. She looked at me like she couldn't believe I didn't already know. "Miss Chen, you haven't seen it." "Seen what?" Without another word, she held out her phone. And just like that, my world stilled. Breaking news. Zhou Corporation CEO Adrian Zhou announces engagement to top actress Lina Chen. Below the headline was a photo. Adrian stood beside Lina Chen, her hand lightly resting on his arm, her smile elegant and effortless. He looked exactly the same as always, calm, composed, untouchable. As if this was just another business arrangement. As if it meant nothing. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the desk. "I see," I said quietly, handing the phone back. Around me, the office erupted into chatter. "I can't believe it. When did this even happen? He's never been seen with a woman before. They look so good together, though." I tuned it all out. Instead, I focused on one thing. The way he had been acting lately. The extra meetings, the lingering glances, the quiet, almost personal questions. For a moment, just a moment, I had thought. No. I pushed the thought away immediately. Of course. Of course this was the reason. An engagement, a public relationship. A woman who fit perfectly into his world, famous, elegant, socially appropriate. Someone worthy of standing beside Adrian Zhou. Unlike me. "Miss Chen." I blinked, realizing someone was calling me. "Yes." "President Zhou is asking for you." Of course he was. I stood, smoothing out my expression, my posture, my voice, everything falling back into place like it always did. Professional, calm, unaffected. I knocked once before entering his office. "Come in." He was standing by the window this time, his back to me, the city stretching out endlessly beyond the glass. "Your engagement has been announced," I said, my tone steady. "Congratulations." For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, "You saw it." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Another pause. I waited for him to say something more, to explain, to clarify, to... But he didn't. Instead, he simply nodded. "Prepare the press schedule," he said, "and coordinate with Miss Liu's team." Just like that. Like it was nothing more than another task, another deal, another step forward in his perfectly controlled life. "Understood," I replied. I turned to leave. But before I reached the door, "Lina." My hand froze on the handle. "Yes." There was something in his voice, something I couldn't quite place. I waited. Seconds passed. And then, nothing. I closed my eyes briefly, forcing myself to breathe. "Then I'll proceed with the arrangements," I said, my voice just as composed as before. And I left. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the noise of the office returned, louder than ever. But it felt distant, muted, because all I could think about was one thing. 8 years. 8 years of standing beside him, of understanding him better than anyone else, of crossing lines that should never have been crossed. And yet, in the end, I was still the one left out of his life. Still the one who meant nothing. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. My hands didn't shake. My expression didn't change. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except for one thing. Something inside me had quietly broken. And for the first time in 8 years, I realized I was tired. Chapter 6. I didn't cry. Not when I first saw the announcement. Not when the office buzzed endlessly with excitement. Not even when I stood in front of Adrian and congratulated him like it meant nothing. Because somewhere along the way, I had already learned how to endure. But that didn't mean I wasn't breaking. It started with something small. I forgot to eat. Not intentionally, I simply didn't feel hungry. Hours passed, then an entire day, and I realized I had only had coffee. My stomach twisted, but I ignored it, just like I ignored everything else. Work came first, it always had. That was the rule I had lived by for 8 years. And now, it was all I had left. "Miss Chen, are you all right?" One of the junior staff asked hesitantly as I handed over a file. I'm fine, I replied automatically. The answer came too easily, too quickly. Because I had said it too many times before. I returned to my desk and stared at the screen in front of me, the numbers blurring slightly as my eyes struggled to focus. My head felt heavy, my body sluggish, but I kept going. Because stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering. The way he had looked at me. The way he had called my name. The way he had said nothing. I exhaled slowly, closing my eyes for just a moment. When I opened them again, my reflection stared back at me from the darkened screen. Pale, tired, empty. I barely recognized myself. When was the last time I had rested properly? When was the last time I had done something for myself? I couldn't remember. 8 years. 8 years of long nights, endless deadlines, and quiet sacrifices. 8 years of building his company, supporting his vision, standing beside him without ever asking for anything in return. And for what? The question came suddenly, sharply, cutting through the fog in my mind. For what? For a position. For a routine. For a man who had just announced his engagement to someone else, without a single word to me. My fingers curled slightly against the desk. No. This wasn't what I wanted anymore. Maybe it never had been. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling as a strange sense of clarity settled over me. I was tired. Not just physically. Emotionally, mentally, completely. I had given everything to this job, to him, and somewhere along the way I had lost myself. And now, there was nothing left to hold on to. The quiet attachment I had once denied, the lingering hope I hadn't even realized I carried, it was gone. Completely gone. All that remained was exhaustion. And for the first time in 8 years, I chose myself. The decision felt almost surreal in its simplicity. I sat up, opened my laptop, and pulled up a blank document. My resignation letter. The words came easily. I hereby submit my resignation, effective 1 month from today. No hesitation, no second thoughts. I didn't mention the reason. There was no need. After all, what could I possibly say? That I was tired. That I had given too much. That staying any longer would break me completely. None of it mattered. This was something I had to do, for myself. When I finished, I read over the letter once, then saved it. A quiet sense of finality settled in my chest. 8 years. And just like that, it was over. I glanced toward the closed door of Adrian's office. He was inside, as always, working, focused, unaware. A small, almost bitter smile tugged at my lips. He would find out eventually. But not from me. I had spent 8 years standing beside him, waiting, enduring, adapting. This time, I wouldn't stay. Chapter 7. The office felt the same. That was the strangest part. After making the decision to leave, I had expected something to change, some shift in the air, some sign that everything I had built here for 8 years was coming to an end. But nothing did. The phone still rang. Meetings still ran on schedule. Employees still rushed through the hallways with the same urgency as always. And Adrian. He left for his month-long business trip as planned. Without knowing anything. Miss Chen, President Zhou's flight has taken off. One of the assistants informed me that morning. I see, I replied calmly. Make sure all overseas meeting documents are sent to his email before noon. Understood. I turned back to my desk, my expression composed, my movement steady. Just like every other day. Except now, everything had a deadline. My 1-month notice period began quietly. No announcement, no explanation. Only the HR department and upper management were informed, and even then, the reaction had been disbelief. You're resigning? The HR manager had asked, clearly stunned. Miss Chen, are you sure? If it's about compensation or position, we can. It's not, I had said gently. And it was. There was nothing they could offer me that would make me stay. Not anymore. The following weeks passed in a blur of handovers and quiet preparation. I trained my replacement, a capable younger assistant named May, guiding her through Adrian's schedules, preferences, and unspoken expectations. "He's very particular about timing," I told her one afternoon. "Never be late, even by a minute, and always have a backup plan ready." May nodded quickly, scribbling notes. "Got it. Anything else?" I hesitated for a moment. There were so many things I could say. How he preferred his coffee without sugar. How he reviewed documents late at night. How he noticed everything, even the smallest mistakes. But those weren't things she needed to know. Those were things only I had learned over 8 years. "That's all," I said finally. Each day, I slowly let go of my responsibilities. Meetings I once led were handed over. Decisions I once made were no longer mine to consider. Piece by piece, I untangled myself from the life I had built here. And surprisingly, it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Maybe because I had already let go. The last day came quietly. There were no farewell parties, no emotional goodbyes. I didn't want them. Instead, I arrived early, just like always, and sat at my desk one final time. The office was still empty, the morning light spilling softly across the polished floors. For a moment, I simply sat there, taking it all in. 8 years of memories. Long nights, endless work, silent sacrifices. Everything I had given. Everything I was leaving behind. I stood up slowly, picking up the small box of personal items I had packed the night before. There wasn't much, just a few essentials. I had never allowed myself to get too comfortable here. Maybe, deep down, I had always known this day would come. Before leaving, I glanced toward Adrian's office. The door was closed, just as it always had been. For a moment, I considered going in. Leaving a note. Saying something, anything. But in the end, I didn't. What was there left to say? 8 years, and he had never once asked me to stay. So this time, I wouldn't give him the chance. I turned away, walking toward the exit without looking back. Each step felt lighter than the last. By the time I reached the doors, the weight I had carried for so long had already begun to fade. The city greeted me with open skies and unfamiliar freedom. For the first time in 8 years, I was no longer Lina Chen, the secretary of Adrian Zhou. I was just me. And without hesitation, I walked away. Chapter 8. The moment Adrian Zhou stepped into the office, something felt off. It wasn't obvious. Everything looked the same. The staff greeted him, the environment was as efficient as ever, and his schedule had been prepared in advance, just as expected. And yet, something was missing. "President Zhou, welcome back," May said, standing beside his desk, slightly nervous. Adrian's gaze swept across the office once before settling on her. "Where is Lina?" The question came naturally, automatically, because she was always there. Before him, after him, everywhere in between. May hesitated, just for a second, but that was enough. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "I asked you a question." "Miss Chen resigned, President Zhou." Silence. The words didn't register at first. "What?" "Her resignation took effect last week," May continued carefully. "She completed the 1-month notice period and handed over all responsibilities before leaving." Adrian didn't move. Didn't speak. The air in the room seemed to freeze. "Resigned," he repeated, slower this time, as if testing the word. "Yes." A faint, almost imperceptible crease appeared between his brows. "When?" "A month ago. She submitted her notice shortly after you left for your overseas trip." "A month ago." His fingers tightened slightly against the desk. "She didn't inform me." It wasn't a question. May lowered her head. "No, President Zhou." Something inside him snapped. A sharp, unfamiliar anger surged through his chest, cold and controlled, but violent in its intensity. 8 years. 8 years she had been by his side, handling everything, understanding everything without needing to be told. And she left, without a word. "Where did she go?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm not sure," May admitted. "She didn't disclose her next position. HR might have more information." Adrian didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked out of his office, his steps fast, precise, leaving no room for interruption. The entire floor fell silent as employees watched him pass, the tension in the air thick enough to suffocate. He didn't stop until he reached HR. "Miss Chen's file," he said. The manager scrambled immediately, pulling up the records. "President Zhou about Miss Chen, I didn't ask for commentary." The manager swallowed and handed over the file. Adrian scanned it quickly. Resignation date, final paperwork, standard procedures. Everything was perfectly in order. Of course it was. That was just like her. Efficient, thorough, leaving nothing unfinished. Leaving nothing behind. Except him. His grip on the file tightened. Why? The question surfaced for the first time. Why would she leave? It wasn't about money. He knew that. Her compensation had been more than sufficient. It wasn't about position. She had more authority than most executives in the company. Then what? A flicker of something crossed his mind. The engagement. His expression darkened. No. That couldn't be it. Their relationship, whatever it was, had always been separate from work, controlled, unspoken. She understood that, didn't she? And yet, the memory of the past few weeks surfaced, the way she had looked at him, quieter than usual, the way she had responded to the announcement, the way she had said nothing. Always nothing. His chest tightened, something unfamiliar clawing its way up from deep within. Not anger. Not entirely. Something sharper. Something he didn't like. "She left the city, President Zhou," the HR manager said cautiously. "We only have a forwarding contact number, but..." "I'll take it." Adrian closed the file with a decisive snap. For the first time in years, his carefully controlled composure cracked, not outwardly, but within. Because one thing had become painfully clear. Lina Chen hadn't just resigned. She had left him. And that was something he would not accept. Chapter 9. Adrian Zhou had always been in control. Of his company. Of his decisions. Of himself. But now, for the first time in years, something was slipping. He stood in his office, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass windows, yet his attention remained fixed on one thing. The empty desk outside. Lina's desk. It was occupied now, organized, functional, efficient. But wrong. Everything was where it should be, files aligned, schedules prepared, reports completed. And yet, nothing felt right. "She used to leave the blue folders on the left," he muttered under his breath. May, standing nearby, froze. President Zhou. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Because every detail reminded him of her. The way she organized documents. The way she anticipated his needs before he even spoke. The way she never made mistakes. The way she was always there. Until she was. His jaw tightened. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," he said abruptly. May blinked in surprise. "All of them?" "Yes." "Understood." The moment she left, silence filled the room. Adrian exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, an uncharacteristic gesture of frustration. Why? The question had been circling his mind endlessly since yesterday. Why would Lina leave? He had given her everything she needed, a stable position, authority, financial security. She had never complained, never asked for more, never shown dissatisfaction. So why now? His thoughts drifted back, unbidden, unwanted. The engagement announcement. The way she had stood in front of him, calm and composed. Congratulations. No emotion, no reaction. Nothing. At the time, he had accepted it, expected it even. That was how Lina had always been, professional, controlled, detached. But now it felt wrong. Because for the first time, he questioned it. Was she really unaffected? Or had he simply never noticed? His chest tightened, a strange, unfamiliar discomfort settling in. He thought back further. The late nights, the quiet moments, the times he had called her into his office for no reason at all. The way she had started pulling away. Subtle, almost unnoticeable. But it had been there, and he had ignored it. A sharp realization hit him. He had assumed she would always stay. That no matter what he did or didn't do, Lina Chen would remain by his side. Because she always had. Because she always would. Right. Wrong. His hand clenched into a fist. She left, he said quietly, the words heavy with something he couldn't quite name. Not anger. Not entirely. Something deeper. Something dangerous. Something he had spent years suppressing, without even realizing it. His gaze darkened. Find her, he said suddenly, his voice cold, decisive. Moments later, his assistant re-entered the room. President Zhou. Track her location. Use the contact information from HR. If that doesn't work, use other means. May hesitated. Other means. Anything necessary. There was no room for argument. No room for delay. Understood. As the door closed behind her, Adrian turned back to the window, his reflection staring back at him. For years, he had believed himself to be immune to distractions. Untouchable. Focused solely on success, on building his empire, on maintaining control over every aspect of his life. Lina had simply been a part of that system. Efficient, reliable, replaceable. Right. His expression darkened. No. If that were true, then why did everything feel so wrong without her? Why did the office feel empty? Why did his thoughts keep returning to her? Why did the idea of her being somewhere else, living a life that didn't include him, make something inside him tighten painfully? A slow, dangerous clarity settled in. This wasn't about losing a secretary. This wasn't about routine or efficiency. This was something else. Something he had ignored for far too long. Lina, he murmured under his breath. His voice was low, possessive, certain. You don't get to leave like that. The city lights flickered on as evening fell, casting shadows across his face. And for the first time, Adrian Zhou stopped pretending. Because now he understood. This wasn't just attachment. It wasn't habit. It wasn't convenience. It was something far more dangerous. Something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Something he would not let slip away. An obsession. And he intended to get her back. No matter what it took. Chapter 10. The city felt too loud, too bright, too alive. And yet, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. I hadn't expected him to find me. Not so quickly, not so decisively. And certainly not now, in this little cafe where I had hoped to disappear for a while. Lina. The voice cut through the morning chatter like a knife. Calm, commanding, yet edged with something I hadn't heard before. I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Adrian, I whispered, half in relief, half in fear. He stepped inside as if he owned the place. The usual cold, unreadable mask I had known for years was gone, replaced by something sharper, something raw. I warned you, he said quietly, taking a step closer, his eyes locking onto mine. You can't just leave. I needed time, I said, my voice trembling slightly, though I tried to keep it steady. 8 years, Adrian. I needed time to breathe, to think, to live for myself. Live for yourself. His voice rose just slightly, more intense than I'd ever heard. Do you think leaving me means living for yourself? Do you think walking away makes it any less us? I flinched. Us, the word hit me harder than anything else. We had a professional relationship, I said, trying to remind myself, trying to hold onto logic. That's all it ever was. That's all it ever should have been, he replied, stepping closer still, so close I could see the faint tension in his jaw, the way his eyes glimmered with something between anger and desperation. But it was, not for me, never for me. My throat went dry. I tried to speak, but the words caught. You don't understand, I whispered. You're already engaged, you can't. Engaged, he interrupted sharply, his hands tightening slightly at his sides. You think that changes anything? Do you think my grandfather can arrange my life for me? Do you think I would go through with it? Do you think I would? He paused, as if the words were almost too heavy to say aloud. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. I would never go through with it. I never wanted it. All I've ever wanted. His gaze locked onto mine, unwavering, unflinching. Was you. Time slowed. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. Adrian, I began, my voice shaking, but he held up a hand, silencing me without touching. I've loved you since the day you joined this company, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it struck me like thunder. I've hated myself for pretending otherwise. I've hated the distance, the work, the facade, and now you leave and I caw. He stepped even closer, the heat of his presence surrounding me. I can't let you go, Lina, not again. I blinked, my mind reeling, my chest tight. But you have a life, an engagement. He shook his head, a soft, bitter laugh escaping him. No, I have nothing without you. Nothing means anything without you. And then he kissed me. Not gentle, not careful, but desperate, claiming, the kind of kiss that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. I felt the years of tension, the suppressed emotions, and the silent understanding we had shared, all collide in that moment. When we finally pulled apart, I was trembling, my voice barely a whisper. I never left because I didn't care. I've always loved you too. His eyes softened for the first time in years. Then stay, with me, not as a secretary, not as a convenience, with me, forever. Tears pricked my eyes, and I nodded, my heart finally at peace. I'll stay, I said, a small, sincere smile breaking across my face. Adrian's grin was quiet but victorious, his hand finally finding mine. Then let's start properly. We walked out of the cafe together, side by side, no words necessary. Because after 8 years of unspoken emotions, broken routines, and quiet devotion, we both knew this was only the beginning. Chapter 11. The air in the apartment felt different that night. Not heavy with exhaustion from work, not tense with unspoken words, not silent with the restraint that had defined our relationship for 8 years. It was soft, warm, familiar, safe. For the first time, I didn't feel like Lina Chen, Adrian Zhou's secretary. Not even a woman caught in the chaos of unspoken feelings. I was just me. And he was just Adrian. Not the untouchable CEO. Not the cold, aloof man who had once terrified me with his piercing gaze and unwavering authority. Just Adrian. He walked into the kitchen, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. The faint scent of his cologne mixed with the aroma of coffee, a simple ritual we had shared for years without thinking. You're quiet, he said softly, noticing me staring at the countertop, lost in thought. I am just thinking, I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. About. I glanced at him, and suddenly the years of suppressed feelings, missed opportunities, and long nights poured into one thought. About us, I said. About how everything finally feels like it's where it should be. Adrian's lips curved into a smile, faint, almost shy, something I had never seen on him before. Yeah, he said quietly, walking over to me. He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear, a small gesture that somehow carried the weight of all the years we had spent circling each other. "It feels right." The room seemed to shrink, our shared space now private and intimate. The barriers that had existed for so long, the professional distance, the unspoken rules, the restraint, were gone. "Adrian," I began, hesitant, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," his hand lingered near mine. I don't want to go back to how things were before. I don't want to be the secretary who stays late, who works all night, who forgets to live for herself." He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "Then don't. That chapter is over, Lina. That life, that version of us, it's done. From now on, we decide together. You, me, and nothing else matters." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Relief, joy, and something deeper all rolled into one. I want that," I said, finally, the words carrying more weight than anything I'd ever said in those 8 years. "I want a life with you, on my terms, with my dreams. And I want you by my side, not as a boss, not as a CEO, but as Adrian." He smiled fully now, the first time I had seen it without any trace of the corporate mask. He pulled me close, holding me for a moment that felt endless. "You have me," he whispered into my hair, his voice low, certain, and steady. "Completely, always, nothing could change that." For the first time in years, I truly believed it. Because the next morning, life began again, but differently this time. I didn't go to the office. I didn't check emails obsessively. I didn't answer business calls. Instead, I began my life anew. I enrolled in a short culinary course I had always wanted to take, and Adrian encouraged me. He even joked about tasting everything I baked, though I knew he secretly loved it. Every day he visited, not as my boss, not as my superior, but as the man who had waited 8 years for me to step into my own life. Every pastry I created, every small bakery experiment, he was there to support, to encourage, and sometimes to taste test with an exaggerated grin that made me laugh more than I had in years. And slowly, what began as a personal hobby grew. Word spread about my small creations, and before I knew it, I had my own little bakery. Not grand, not flashy, just mine. A place where I could pour my heart into something that wasn't a report, a spreadsheet, or a schedule. And Adrian, he never missed a day. Every morning, a croissant or a box of pastries in hand, visiting, supporting, loving in every quiet, perfect way. It wasn't just the beginning of my bakery. It was the beginning of us. Chapter 12. The morning sun streamed through the bakery's windows, casting warm golden light across the freshly polished countertops. The smell of sugar and butter filled the air, comforting and familiar, my sanctuary. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped back to admire the display of pastries. Croissants, tarts, eclairs, each one made with care, each one a tiny piece of me now in the world. "Smells amazing in here," Adrian's voice said from the doorway. I turned to see him leaning casually, his jacket draped over his arm, a soft smile playing on his lips. "You're here again," I said, shaking my head with a laugh. "You really don't have to come every morning." He shrugged, walking closer. "I like watching my favorite chef in action." I rolled my eyes playfully. "Favorite chef, huh? Not your CEO." He grinned, leaning against the counter, eyes warm as he looked at me. "Definitely you." His words made my chest tighten, a familiar flutter I hadn't felt in years, but had never truly forgotten. For 8 long years, he had been my boss, my tormentor, my anchor, and now my partner. "Everything okay for today?" I asked, changing the topic, knowing the bakery schedule wouldn't follow itself. "Perfectly fine," he said, his gaze lingering on me for just a beat too long. Then, as if remembering something, he walked to the counter and picked up a tray of chocolate croissants. "You really are amazing, Lina. Every detail, it's perfect." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Compliments from Adrian had always carried weight, they had power. But now, they felt tender, personal, filled with an unspoken love that hadn't been there in the office. I leaned against the counter, watching him as he sat at the small table in the corner, casually sipping his coffee and pretending not to look at me. but I knew him too well. He couldn't hide it. Never could. "You know," I said softly, "I never thought I'd enjoy this much freedom. After years of deadlines, meetings, and, well, you." He chuckled softly. "I missed this too," he admitted. "Watching you smile while you work, seeing the little joy in your eyes when something turns out just right." I blinked at him. "You watch me." His grin was almost mischievous. "Of course I watch you. You're irresistible when you focus." I laughed, shaking my head, but inside my heart fluttered. 8 years of tension, unspoken feelings, and controlled interactions had led to this moment, soft, tender, alive. "Do you think the bakery will grow?" I asked, my tone hopeful but cautious. He stood and walked around the counter, leaning down so his face was level with mine. "It will," he said confidently. "Not because of the pastries, though they're incredible." His eyes softened. "Because of you, you put your heart into everything. People notice that. They'll come back again and again." I felt a warmth spread in my chest, a mix of pride and something deeper. Love, finally unspoken but fully acknowledged. Adrian reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face, a gentle, intimate gesture that made my knees weak. "And I'll be here, every step of the way, for you, for this, for us." My hands trembled slightly as I reached for his, holding it firmly. "I'm glad you're here, more than you know." We stood together for a moment, hands intertwined, the bakery bustling around us. Yet nothing else existed, no deadlines, no stress, no corporate world, only us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, utterly at peace. The little bakery wasn't just a business. It was our sanctuary, our new beginning. And as Adrian kissed my forehead gently, I knew this was the start of something lasting, built not from schedules and contracts, but from love, support, and shared dreams. From flour and frosting came love. And from love came everything. Chapter 13. The small bakery had grown faster than I ever imagined. What started as a single corner shop, my personal sanctuary, was now bustling with loyal customers, familiar faces, and the sweet hum of a business that had finally taken root. I had poured my heart into every recipe, every decoration, every pastry. And now, seeing it flourish filled me with a pride I had never felt before, not even during my 8 years at the company. Adrian was with me every step of the way. Not in the way he had been as a boss, ordering schedules, reviewing reports, and measuring efficiency, but in the way a true partner supports another, quietly, reliably, devotedly. He would arrive each morning, not just to buy pastries for himself, but for his employees, for friends, for anyone who might appreciate the little joys we created. Every time he returned, he'd come with a box in hand, a soft grin on his lips, and eyes that seemed to see only me. "Lina, these chocolate tarts are amazing," he said one morning, as we prepared for a small catering order. "Seriously, you've outdone yourself." I laughed, brushing flour off my apron. "It's just chocolate and cream. Don't make it sound like I invented fire." "Chocolate and cream," he corrected, leaning closer with a teasing smirk. "Perfectly balanced, flawless, and you perfect too." I felt my cheeks heat up, but before I could respond, he added softly, "I can't get enough of watching you work. You're incredible." My heart tightened at his words, the sincerity behind them unmistakable. I had spent years admiring him, from afar, from across a cluttered desk, and now I saw him not just as Adrian Zhou, the CEO, but Adrian Zhou, the man who loved me devotedly, completely. The expansion of the bakery wasn't just a dream anymore. It was becoming real. A second branch was opening downtown, a larger space with more ovens, more staff, and more opportunities to share our creations with the city. "You've really done it," Adrian said one evening as we stood in the empty shop, the sunlight fatting through the large windows. "Look at this place. Look at what you've built." I took a deep breath, gazing around the empty space, imagining the bustling customers, the laughter, the aromas of fresh bread and sugar. "It's hard to believe it's really happening," I admitted. He stepped closer, hands resting on my shoulders. "You did this, Lina, all of this. And I'll always be here, whether it's taste testing pastries, dealing with suppliers, or just making sure you don't overwork yourself. I smiled, touched by his unwavering support. I don't think I could have done it without you, Adrian. I mean emotionally, not just practically. He chuckled softly, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. That's my job, and I'll never stop. You're mine, Lina, not in a possessive way, well, maybe a little, but I mean it in the way I'll always be here for you. Every step, every triumph, every mistake. For the first time in my life, I truly felt seen. Not as a secretary, not as an employee, not as someone who had spent years tirelessly giving herself to another's dreams, but as Lina Chen, capable, strong, and loved completely for who I was. The night fell, and we stood together in the empty bakery, imagining the second branch filled with the scent of fresh pastries and the hum of happy customers. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth and devotion that radiated from him, and I realized something important. This was more than a bakery. This was our life. And with Adrian by my side, I knew we could create anything, together. Chapter 14. The bakery had just closed for the evening, the golden light from the lamps casting a soft glow across the polished counters. The city outside was alive with the hum of nightlife, but inside it was quiet, just the two of us, surrounded by the sweet scent of sugar, flour, and baked goods. I leaned against the counter, tired but satisfied. Today had been another successful day. The second branch was finally fully operational, and seeing it run smoothly brought me a sense of pride I had never felt before. Adrian, as usual, was there, his presence warm and grounding, his eyes soft as they watched me. "You've outdone yourself again," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "This place, this life you've built, it's incredible." I smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Thanks, but you've been just as much a part of this as I have. I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head, stepping closer, the air between us charged with something I couldn't quite name. "No, this is all you, Lina. I'm just lucky enough to witness it and be part of it." My heart tightened at his words, and I felt a flutter of anticipation I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. My eyes widened, and my breath caught. "Adrian, what?" He dropped to one knee before I could finish, his gaze unwavering. "Lina Chen," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "For 8 years, I've watched you dedicate yourself to everything but yourself. I've watched you give so much and still keep a piece of yourself hidden just for me to see. And through it all, I've loved you, always. Not as a secretary, not as an employee, but as the woman I want to share my life with." Tears pricked my eyes as he opened the box, revealing a delicate ring that seemed to sparkle even in the soft light. "You've been my anchor, my inspiration, my heart. I don't want another day without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Time seemed to stop. My chest tightened, my hands trembling slightly as I processed the moment. 8 years of shared glances, unspoken words, and late-night interactions had led to this. Adrian, cold, aloof, untouchable Adrian, was vulnerable before me, confessing everything he had kept hidden. Adrian," my voice shook, my heart racing. "Of course I will. I've always wanted this, always wanted you." His face lit up with a rare, unguarded smile, and he slipped the ring onto my finger. I felt the weight of it, not just as a symbol, but as a promise of the life we would build together. He stood and pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly, as if letting go now would undo the years of longing. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this," he murmured into my hair. "I think I do," I whispered back, wrapping my arms around him. "And I've waited too." We pulled back slightly, our foreheads resting together, eyes locked. "From now on," he said softly, "no more distance, no more pretending, no more work keeping us apart, just you and me building a life together." I smiled, tears spilling freely now. "Yes, just us." For the first time in years, I felt completely free. Not from work, not from expectations, not from the past, but free to love him without hesitation, without fear, without boundaries. As we stood there, the bakery quiet around us, I knew this was only the beginning. A new chapter awaited us, one built on love, devotion, and partnership, and I couldn't wait to live it together. Chapter 15. The day had finally arrived. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the elegant chapel, casting a warm glow over the gathered friends and family. The air was filled with soft music, the kind that made your chest tighten and your heart beat just a little faster. I took a deep breath, adjusting the delicate lace of my wedding gown. My hands trembled, not from nerves, but from anticipation. Today, after years of unspoken feelings, quiet devotion, and slow-burning love, I was finally going to marry Adrian Zhou. He stood at the altar, tall and immaculate in his tuxedo, every bit the man I had loved for over a decade. His usual cold, composed demeanor softened by the warmth in his eyes whenever they met mine. For 8 years, he had been my boss, my tormentor, my anchor, and now he was mine completely. When our eyes met, a small, private smile passed between us, a secret acknowledgement of the journey we had shared, the late nights at the office, the bakery mornings, the quiet moments of understanding and care. "Lina," he whispered as I reached the altar, his hand brushing gently against mine, sending a shiver up my spine. "You're more beautiful than I ever imagined." "And you," I replied softly, my voice trembling, "are everything I've waited for." The ceremony began, vows exchanged with words full of sincerity, promises of love, partnership, and support. When Adrian's hand found mine, I felt the years of tension, longing, and restraint melt away. "I promise to love you," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "Through every triumph, every mistake, every ordinary day and extraordinary moment. You are my heart, Lina, and I will never let you go." Tears blurred my vision, but I smiled, squeezing his hand tightly. "And I promise to love you, Adrian, to support you, to care for you, to grow with you every single day." When we finally sealed our vows with a kiss, the world seemed to fall away. Only us, only the love that had taken years to surface, finally free, unstoppable, complete. After the ceremony, we celebrated quietly at a small reception with close friends and family. But the real joy came later, in our life together. We settled into a home near the bakery, a space filled with warmth, laughter, and the small, beautiful chaos of everyday life. Adrian never missed a day of supporting me, whether that meant taste-testing pastries, helping with deliveries, or simply being there at the end of a long day with a comforting presence. 2 years later, our home echoed with even more laughter. Our twins arrived, 2 little bundles of joy, a boy and a girl, each carrying a piece of both of us. Watching Adrian hold them for the first time, gently rocking them in his strong, steady arms, I realized that the man who had once terrified me with his cold, aloof demeanor was now the most tender, devoted father. "You've made me so happy," he whispered one evening, sitting beside me as we watched the twins sleep, their tiny hands clutching at blankets and each other. "And you've made me feel loved," I replied softly. "Completely loved, Adrian, more than I ever imagined." He leaned down, brushing a soft kiss against my temple. "That's because we're a team. We always have been. You and me, us." And it was true. For the first time, I felt the depth of that statement, not just as a phrase, but as a reality built over years of shared experiences, struggles, and quiet devotion. Our bakery continued to thrive, our love deepened, and our little family grew in laughter and happiness. 8 years of restraint, 8 years of silent longing had led to this. A life rich not in wealth or power, but in love, trust, and shared dreams. As Adrian held me close, our twins nestled between us, I knew that this was only the beginning. The beginning of a life filled with laughter, pastries, love, and a bond that no obstacle could break. Finally, after years of waiting, we were home, together, forever. The end. This story was brought to you by Romance Hobbit. Thank you.